Hi there. So, as you can see from the freaking thumbnail, each each be cool. This definitely didn't take me like 3 to 4 redraws to do. You can actually see in my posts, I left a little hint though to it, the undersketch, aka my third attempt at formatting this thing. Okay. Now, the only reason it wasn't the complete thing is because I was recording it today anyway, you know? Yeah, the whole sneak peek thing won the vote, and a bunch of people wanted to see stats. I think that's hilarious that multiple people wanted to just see the stats. Not that I could blame you, because I've done that before. But, I'm going to be recording chapter, chapter TSIP. Chapter 11 of I Borrowed a Cat's Paws by Crouching Tiger. Now, remember to check my post if you want to recommend me fics. There's a recommendation post in there. Go over there and listen to the instructions, and you can recommend me stuff. For now, though, why don't we get on to the chapter? So I'm going to shut the fuck up now. There was something to be said for the innate human desire for company. Shota hadn't had any friendly contact since he'd met Namasa at the police station on his first day of being a cat. He tended to be pretty solitary by nature, but usually he at least had the option to spend time with someone who actually liked him and who he actually liked in return. Hazashi, Namuri, even Nezu Khan, or Ectoplasm, his sisters and parents if he got really desperate. Now he had nothing but the dwindling hope of escape. Nor did he have anything to do. Shota was not a person who appreciated idleness. He had 2 jobs, volunteered at the Red Lotus to help quirkless people, and used the rest of his time to avoid getting roped into social events, which was an exhausting endeavor in and of itself. Sure, Shota liked to sleep. There was a reason he earned the nickname Energy Saver Show in high school. But he had the reputation of the constantly tired teacher because he disturbed his sleeping blocks to unorthodox times and places. Not because he was actually always sleeping. Now that he was stuck as a cat with no thumbs, nothing important to get done, and not even a safe place to meditate in, Shota was going more than a little bit stir crazy. He understood now why cats were always sleeping. There was literally nothing else to do. Unfortunately, Shota couldn't even sleep to pass the time. He never struggled to sleep in unfamiliar places, but there was basically nothing Shota could do to force his brain to sleep properly in an unsafe place. Many years of ingrained paranoia, growing up quirkless, then with a villain's quirk, then being a pro hero, had pounded that deep into his psyche. Once he got accustomed to the different feel of being a cat, Shota couldn't manage anything more than a surface level doze, unless he was truly exhausted. His sleep was far too easily to interrupt, and it appeared that sleep was a rare commodity for everyone in the League's hideout. No matter the time of day, there was someone up and doing something. It had actually been a downright miracle that Shota had managed to get any time alone. left alone to argue with the front door his first 2 nights. Because there was always someone in the living room or kitchen. Dobby eating ice like it was the only thing sustaining him. Spinner driven to wander from insomnia. Shigaraki staying up until 3 in the morning to 100% his video game. Mr. Capress typing madly on his battered laptop. Kuragiri cleaning or baking or mixing elaborate drinks for reasons Shota still couldn't pin down. And even Magne draped over the couch reading cheesy romance novels. The only person he hadn't seen out in the living room at unholy hours of the night was Toga. That was a red flag in and of itself, because chronic exhaustion was almost always paired with the mania that came from a bearer of a blood-based quirk not getting enough blood. Honestly, every day Shota was getting more and more concerned for every member of the League of Villains. No matter what he told himself, spending a lot of time with the same people's company would inevitably lead to caring about them in some way or of another. The more time Shota spent with them, the more he noticed. The more he couldn't help but notice, no matter how much he tried not to. When he was Nezu's personal student, the rat had told Shota that his fatal flaw was that he cared too much. Shota knew he was right. Knew since even before Obero's death had almost flattened him. He'd unintentionally cultivated a strict, unapproachable persona to keep from getting too attached to his students too fast. If he was prickly and unfriendly on the outside, nobody tried to get close, so he never got too close to anyone else. That didn't work here. There was only so much avoiding you could do of someone in a relatively small building with 8 people and a cat living in it. Plus, people avoided an ornery cat in a much different way than they avoided an unfriendly and standoffish pro-hero. As a hero, people steered clear or responded in kind, returning slight for perceived slight. But Shota's unfriendly persona was no match for the inherent adorable nature of all cats everywhere. There was a unique sort of affection people harbored for per- particularly ill-mannered and temperamental pets. Just look at old ladies and their feral parse chihuahuas. Or Shota and his own brat of a cat who exploded things to get attention. After long enough, even with tempers enhanced by quirk-free meltdowns, sleep deprivation, and personality disorders, the League of Villains had started to harbor a sarcastic kind of endearment for him. Shota had pushed a mostly empty cup of coffee off the counter, and Dobby, the person who wanted to torch Shota to cinders, offered him a lazy good work demon just because it had been decaf. Which Shota agreed that decaffeinated coffee completely defeated the purpose of coffee and deserved to be wiped from existence. But still, that wasn't normal. And if it wasn't bad enough that Dobby was starting to like him, Shota's reaction had only made it worse. He was glad that Dobby approved, glad that he'd made Dobby smile. And no matter how much Shota tried to brush off the feeling as relief that he wasn't shooting fire, there was only so long he could deny the reality starting to face him, staring him in the face. Shota was becoming attached. The problem with his experience as a hero and hyper-awareness of being in the middle of the villain's den was that Shota saw everything. Everything they did or said was categorized and given a valid explanation. His reasoning was perfectly logical. Every fact he had learned was just that, a fact. Shigaraki was perpetually dehydrated as a side effect of not using his quirk properly, but Shota was pretty sure nobody but him had realized that. Kurogiri struggled with his sense of self. Twice really struggled with his sense of self. Dabi's hair-trigger temper was a result of perpetual untreated quirk pre-meltdown. His nightmares were from something else entirely. Unfortunately, while these were all cold hard facts, Shota couldn't explain away the way they made him feel. The younger members of the League of Villains, Dabi, Toga, Spinner, and even Shigaraki, were only a few years older than Shota's Hell class. They were the same age as some of his older now graduate classes. The more time Shota spent in their presence, the more he was forced to accept that they were kids. They'd hurt his students, had killed an unknown number of people, and had caused the first seeds of doubt to creep into the public's perception of heroes and the hero world. But they were still kids. Kids who had no proper support structure. Guidance only from a psychopathic mass murderer, and no other options. Shota's resolve to see them exactly as they were, a threat to him, his class, and potentially all of Japan, was slipping. It was slipping fast. He was holding on to it by his fingertips, but if he stayed here longer, he was bound to be there was bound to be a breaking point. Said breaking point came about 2 weeks after he'd first been picked up by Kurogiri. It was sometime after midnight, and Shota had just been awoken by Dabi slipping into the room for his nightly adventure for ice and mints. Shota flicked an ear, listening to Dabi's progress through the room. He padded up the step to the kitchen, and the freezer door opened. Ice clinked on glass, and the freezer door closed. Cellophane crinkled. As Dabi started back to the living room door, there was a loud thud, louder than any sound Dabi had ever made in his late night ice and mint trips. It was a sound Shota was immensely familiar with, the sound of a body hitting the ground. It was accompanied by a sharp clink of a thick glass cup hitting the floor, and the clattering and clinking of ice and cellophane wrapped mitts spilling over the floor. Shota slitted his eyes open, peering out from under the love seat. Dabi was mostly hidden by the couch. But Shota could see one of hand peeking out from behind the couch, curled like a claw and twitching with uncontrolled spasms. A low gurgle came from Dabi, who had made no move to get off the floor. It was immediately followed by a sizzling hiss, and the room flared with light and the sharp scent of burning skin. Cursing under his breath, Shota shot out from under the love seat and darted around the couch. He almost tripped over a thrashing tendril of flame, and he only barely leaped back in time to avoid getting singed. Wave after wave of heat washed off Dabi, and flaring coils and sheets of fire writhed around him, the flames ranging from dull red to eye-searing white and lashing out in every direction. Dobby himself was sprawled on the floor like a dropped doll, twitching uncontrollably. He clenched his chest with one hand, while the other clawed uselessly at the floor. Spikes and jolts of his typical blue fire raced over his skin, tracing the edges of his scars and searing new lines into what little unblemished skin he had. Blistering heat radiated from him with every twitch, baking Shota's fur to dry, brittle strands in seconds. Shota was not one to stand around staring uselessly. That response had been trained out of him years ago. The instant he had taken in the situation, it was analyzed. Inability to properly control muscles or quirk, unintentional quirk activation, sudden onset, still breathing, diagnosed, barely holding back a fire quirk meltdown, and provided with a solution. Lower the temperature of his core, however possible. Unfortunately, Shota was a house cat. Shota couldn't do anything himself to help. Erasing Dobby's quirk now would only hurt him more. His insides were literally being cooked by lingering remnants of incautious quirk use. The uncontrolled fire was venting that excess heat. Getting rid of that vent would boil Dobby from the inside out. The only thing Shota had going for him was that he knew what was happening and how to fix it. When it came to actually taking on villains, Shota's hero work mostly consisted of hiding, getting places quietly, and then jumping out and taking people down before they knew he was there. He was silent and deadly, unheard even by those with hearing enhancement in quirks. In his marriage, he was undoubtedly the quiet one. When your husband was President Mike, it was hard to be the loud partner. That didn't mean he couldn't make himself heard. He also taught high school students, after all. Shota's lungs burned as he breathed the superheated air around Dobby, but he didn't care. His heart was racing, adrenaline pouring through him, and with a deep breath of dry, broiling air, Shota screamed. Cats, as it turned out, could make a lot of noise. Shota's wordless screech came out as an ear-splitting that had doors flying open and angry footsteps sounding through the hallway. Even Dobby startled at the noise, and he gasped a deep, shuddering breath. His eyes rolled toward Shota, and the fire flickering over his skin flared higher. Shota didn't have the time to care. He howled again. Caterwauling as loud as his little cat lungs could manage. The living room door flew open, and Shota was off like a shot, diving between Magne's legs. She was so startled by the sight of Dobby's meltdown that she didn't even react to Shota's passing. Shota beelined for the bathroom. The door was only cracked open slightly, but Shota went through it so fast the door shuddered completely open. With adrenaline pouring through him, Shota didn't even stop to think about the shower knob. It had a lever knob, and up he jerked up with his paws in a move he probably couldn't consciously repeat. Then he yanked the shower stopper up. The plug was sitting on the rim of the tub, and Shota managed to grab the ring in his teeth and shove it into place, starting the tub filling. With the shower running over him, Shota was effectively drenched by the time he leapt out of the bathtub and tore down the hallway again. The entire league was awake now, hovering around Dobby, making panicked conversation. Shota quickly sorted through his options and narrowed in on Kuragiri as the one most likely to listen to him. "Hey!" Shota shouted, lunging forward to grab the hem of Kuragiri's pants and yank. "Follow me!" He let go and bounded towards the door, hovering in the doorway as Kuragiri turned to look at him. "Come on!" Shota jerked his head, his tail lashing. Kuragiri started towards him, and Shota impatiently waited for him to catch up before making it for the bathroom door. Kuragiri peered in, mist roiling insecretably. "He needs to cool down his core," Shota said, leaping up onto the rim of the bathtub and glaring at Kuragiri. "Come on, you're not an idiot!" Dobby materialized in thin air over the bathtub, falling from a misty portal that had twisted into existence, and Shota leapt away as the controlled flame lashed out at everything around him. Dobby dropped the short distance into the water, and instantly the room filled with steam. Shota coughed as smoke and steam warred for dominance in his lungs, but he leapt back onto the rim of the tub and reached through the roiling steam to paw at the shower knob. He managed to turn the knob so water went from lukewarm to freezing cold. It would be unpleasant if Dobby was still awake, but it would cool him down much faster. Dobby started struggling in the cold shower spray, almost managing to sit up under his own power. Should have bounded forward without thinking, landing on his shoulders and shoving him back into the water. Dobby sputtered under the spray, and more steam billowed through the room. The uncontrollable fire was dying down, but under Shota's paws, Dobby's skin was still uncomfortably warm, and he kept trying to get to sit up. A whip of cold red fire lashed out at him, but Shota ignored it, clawing his way over Dobby's gimbly to land in the freezing water himself, using his paws to scoop waves of grayish water over Dobby's shoulders. A moment later, black mist filled the tub, mixing with the steam and smoke to make it properly impossible to see anything at all. Shota's nose was full of the acidic scent of burning plastic. His vision was completely obscured by mist, smoke, and whatever increasing steam. His lungs ached from breathing smoke. One of his hind legs smartened with burns, and he couldn't hear anything but the shower and Dobby's incoherent sputtering. He flattened his ears to his skull, pinpointed the brightest light in the haze, and shoveled more water over any flames that popped up. It felt like it had been hours by the time Shota hauled himself out of the bathtub. As Dobby cooled down, the uncontrollable fire slowly petered out, no longer turning the water to steam. What had started as elbow deep rose to knee deep, then neck deep. And then Shota had to paddle to stay afloat, or cling to Dobby's barely conscious, still twitching body. The water was so full of smoke and grime that it was a muddy gray at that point. Eventually someone turned off the shower, and that was when Shota elected to leave, hauling himself from Dobby's shoulder to the brim of the tub. He was soaked to the bone, the taste of burnt plastic lingering on his tongue, and the spicy, bitter firewood scent of Dobby's cork stuck in his nose. Once when Shota was still a relatively green hero, he ended up at the site of a building fire. The building hadn't been super full before the fire started, but the elevators locked down. There was a woman in a wheelchair and her two grown children trapped on the fourth floor. Shota had the proper training, an airtight seal in his goggles, and his fire-resistant costume. With the fire truck still 10 minutes out and no other option, he'd run straight into the burning building. Shota had gotten her out, and her children had followed once they knew their mom was getting the help she needed. Shota's not quite as fireproof capture weapon had caught fire just as they were almost out. But Shota had done nothing but quickly pass the woman to her son, who, once he was no longer panicking, managed to carry her pretty easily. His jumpsuit, after all, was fireproof enough to get by until they were out of the burning building. The firefighters on site, upon seeing what appeared to be a man made of fire following the woman and her family out of the building, made the logical decision and turned the fire hose on him. Shota felt about like that now. At the time, he'd gotten away with only a few burns around his neck and a couple cracked ribs from the force of the fire hose, but everything had hurt for days afterwards, his lungs and eyes and even skin aching furiously from the oppressive heat. At least this time, he didn't have any broken bones. For now. Shota slumped onto the bath mat, now stained a dirty gray with the grimy water in it, and tried to convince himself to stand up and get out of the bathroom. The bath mat was unfairly comfortable, especially considering it was soaked through with freezing cold water. It smelled like smoke. Then again, Shota was also soaked through with freezing cold water and smelled like smoke. Hey, forced his eyes open through the sudden onslaught of exhaustion and found the unreadable face of Mr. Capress hovering over him. If I pick you up, are you going to claw my eyes out? Shota mustered a defensive hiss, baring his teeth half-heartedly and flattening his ears to his skull. He didn't want Capress anywhere near him. Mr. Capress visibly suppressed a sigh, his face tightening with frustration. Are you planning to say soot covered in soot and who knows what else on the bathroom floor forever? Just to spite him, Shota struggled to his feet, pushing away his exhaustion to shoot a flat look at Mr. Capress. I'm going to run you a warm bath in the kitchen sink, Mr. Capress said bluntly. If that's not up to your standards, then I hope you have fun licking ash out of your fur. Mr. Capress spun on his heel and stalked out of the room. And after a moment, Shota followed. He felt like he was wading through sooty water still, or like he was in one of those dreams where it was impossible to get anywhere in time, and pale-haired villains turned his students or husband to dust in front of him. Every step was a struggle, but Shota was only alive today because his immeasurable capability for spite. So he soldiered onwards. True to his words, Mr. Capress had the kitchen faucet running by the time Shota made it to the door. Shota's attention was drawn to the back of the couch. There was a broad pattern of scorch marks on the floor where Dobby had collapsed, and the fabric of the couch itself had been reduced to singed tatters. A few of the tiles in the kitchen area had been cracked by the heat. Suddenly, Shota's aching body made more sense. He'd run straight into what was essentially a living bonfire without a single second thought, then spent who knows how long wrestling said living bonfire with nothing but his bare cat paws and a tub full of fringed water. It took all of Shota's not insignificant willpower to get up onto the bar top, and then he almost missed the jump to the counter. His singed back leg missed its grip, but Shota used his momentum to rock himself forward and managed to avoid being a living example of those cat videos where the cat jumps too short and falls on the floor. Shota had once spent a night completely sloshed and ugly sobbing over those videos. He almost shed real tears. Shota practically toppled into the sink, only putting in enough effort to stay upright. I don't have Shigaraki shampoo, Mr. Compress said, almost apologetic. Don't touch me, Shota told him tiredly before dunking his head underwater to scrub at his ears. The clear water very quickly turned grayish, and once Shota was sure he'd gotten all the soot he could out of his fur, he hauled himself back up onto the counter. I've got Dobby's towel, Magne volunteered, holding up a towel that was probably blue at some point, but had been stained by so much hair dye that it was completely black. Sloppy use of hair dye that Shota knew from experience that even black dye should mostly come out in the first wash, leaving very little behind on your towels. Shota let her towel him off. Too tired to bother protesting, once he was mostly dry, he dropped off the counter, slinking slowly down the steps to the living room side. Typically, Shota had no issue sleeping on the ground, especially as a cat. He'd found that it didn't really affect him. But now with every part of him aching, and the shallow burn on his leg stinging with every step, Shota found himself longing for something soft. The living room was a no-go. Shigaraki would be using his chair, and everything was too out in the open for him to let him sleep for long, even as physically exhausted as he was now. The living room door was still hanging open, and as almost every door in the hallway, Shota limped into Dobby, Spinner, and Twice's bedroom, found the bed that smelled like smoke, and squirmed his way under Dobby's comforter. Dobby wouldn't be using it any time soon. Recovering from Firequirk meltdown left one feeling wired and hyper-aware once the immediate fatigue wore off. Hopefully, no one would bother Shota until he woke up on his own after sleeping for an entire month. Yeah, that was the chapter. So, you know that scream noise? I actually had to warn my family. They could hear me when I meow and shit, and considering I wanted to be really loud, um, I knew I had to at least give them a heads up so they didn't think I was dying. It was kind of embarrassing to do it, but honestly, it was so worth it. I listened back to it and I was like, "Holy shit! I thought I would have to redo this 3 times." I was actually pretty happy with it. The second one I did, I was even more happy with. That one was great. Anyway, I think that's enough for this. I do have posts that are existing. The only reason I'm not even gonna record a second one is because I'm debating streaming later. Because I know me, Dull, and Brain, Dull and Sailor are gonna try to work on finishing a chapter of the cat fic we are writing. God, I write too many cat fics. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. Bye!